Who's joining us, Elizabeth? Rick Rollens.
Have an advocate, a legislative advocate, on a great story. So we'll get into the details. Thompson Espinosa Show, KFI AM 640. KFI AM 640, Thompson Espinosa Show. Elizabeth Espinosa, Mark Thompson. Well, there's a hashtag out there, and it is hashtag shameful. Hashtag keep the promise. Did you know that basic support services, Mark, for people with disabilities, and you know this is big, obviously for someone who lives with someone with a severe disability, disabilities like autism, which is on the rise, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, have received just one rate increase of 3% this century, while the cost of living has risen by 30%. There is a gross underfunding, and it's causing a desperate need for so many families, and it affects all taxpayers. So we wanted to bring on Rick Rollens, who's a legislative advocate for the Association of Regional Centers Agencies, and he's part of basically this Lanterman Coalition, which is a group representing 19 organizations to support people with developmental disabilities, and trying to get the California state budget to be a little bit more balanced when it comes to people and families with disabilities. Welcome to Thompson Espinosa Show, Rick.
Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth, and thank you so much again for having me on.
Tell us a little bit about this this mission here, 10% initiative. What is that? How does that affect everyone, somebody who doesn't even care about people with disabilities?
Well, our system in California, which serves approximately 285,000 individuals with autism, cerebral palsy, epilepsy, and intellectual disabilities, has been around since about 1970. And over those years, this system, again, that serves the most vulnerable in our society, has undergone decades of benign neglect. And then on top of that, there have been rate freezes, rate reductions, program development freezes. And the thing that has really hurt this system and why we're on the brink of collapse is that during the recent huge recession that we had here in California, the state government cut back severely in spending, and our system that serves the most vulnerable folks in California took over $1 billion of reductions in funding, which has really had the impact of not only weakening on the edge of collapse many segments of our service delivery system, but also has put us way behind in the development of new programs to deal with new populations that are growing at a huge rate. Autism, for instance, now the prevalence, according to the CDC, is 1 in 68. And if you have a boy, you have a 1 in 42 chance of having a boy diagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder. These are very severely impacted individuals like my son, who does have autism, and thousands of other like him. Our system is in grave need of an influx of funding, and as you mentioned, the Lanterman Coalition is an organization, a statewide organization, which the Regional Center Association and the 21 not-for-profit regional centers are an active participant in, has been lobbying heavily the governor and the legislature for a 10% increase this year in the budget to try to stabilize the decline in this system and start.
So it's just 10%. We're asking the governor to sign off, and he won't sign off. So far, he's not doing this.
Yeah, we have, under the leadership of Senator Jim Bell and others in the legislature, there was a tremendous effort this year to get the legislature to put money in the budget. And the legislature did respond, not at 10%. We're continuing to push for that, but the governor agreed essentially not to put any money in the budget this year for us over and above the normal funding for the system based on caseload growth, and shifted the whole debate over to something called an extraordinary session, where we are now competing for money outside of the general fund.
So we're in limbo land. Yeah, we're just in limbo land. I mean, we're talking about 280,000 people with developmental disabilities, in the state, right? And unable to, if not more, but unable to march and protest at the Capitol.
Yeah, these folks, are severely impacted. They have cerebral palsy, they have intellectual disabilities, epilepsy, autism, and it's not only the individuals that are impacted, it's the families, the friends, the extended families, and others that are deeply involved. And even someone who doesn't have a person with a developmental disability, it won't take you long to find a friend or a relative who does. And again, just with the autism numbers, those are scary odds. 1 in 42 boys. I mean, that's horrific.
Elizabeth knows so much more about this area and is so close to this subject, but I've learned stuff along the way. And the regional centers that you all depend on, they talk about the fact that they've had to add staff, as you said, more cases have come in, and yet they're getting the same payment rates that they got 2 decades ago. In other words, their costs are going up, and so they're having to lay people off and all this other stuff. What's happening to these regional centers? And explain just in a second what these regional centers are.
Yeah, so California's system is based on the State Department of Developmental Services, which is sort of the mothership of our program. And then there are 21 not-for-profit regional centers that contract with the state to provide services through a network of vendors throughout the state. We have a couple 100,000 vendors that provide different types of services to people who we serve. So the regional centers provide direct services through case management and finding generic services and also qualifying for the federal dollars. Half the money that this system receives comes from the federal government, and we've made promises to the federal government to keep certain caseload ratios, and we're terribly out of compliance, and we're putting at risk, quite frankly, the federal funding to our system by not complying with what they're asking for.
And, Rick, give us the example about how everyone as a taxpayer should care about this budget deal, because when you look about institutionalizing someone with a disability, it's going to cost you as a taxpayer much more.
Yeah, that's a great point, Elizabeth. Our system, over 70% of the folks that we serve currently live at home, and there's no better deal for taxpayers than having someone with a disability living under their family's roof. Once the decision is made by the family or the situation gets very difficult, and the regional centers then have to place that individual in out-of-home placement, provide all the care, and if something is not found in the community, then, of course, in the past, and we're moving quickly to close our state institutions known as developmental centers. But today it costs over $500,000 a year to institutionalize someone.
$500,000 a year?
For one person, yes.
As opposed to, let's say, somebody who stays at home with supports?
With supports, we're down in the $30,000-$40,000 a year.
Per year.
At the high end. So, again, the bang for the buck is for taxpayers and for everyone, really, to try to contact the governor and the President Pro Tem of the Senate, Kevin De Leon, who is in your catchment area in Los Angeles, who's been a strong supporter of our program, as well as Speaker Tony Atkins from San Diego, and ask them to push as hard as they can, particularly with the governor, to convince him that this is a much-needed influx of funding for a very important program.
So is there a website, Rick, or something that people can go to show their support for you and this program?
We've been referring folks to the governor's office,
he doesn't answer though.
And but they do. I'm fortunate. My career before I became the legislative advocate for ARCA, I spent 24 years in the California State Senate as the Secretary of the Senate. So I know the legislature pretty well, and I know the governor, and I know how they respond to these things. And the more calls, the more emails, the more faxes, the more contact that's made, the bigger of an impact it makes. So
we'll even tweet him too. We can also tweet him.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so tweet the governor and say support the 10% initiative. Is that right?
Absolutely. That would be so helpful.
Thanks, Rick Rollens, legislative advocate for the Association of Regional Center Agencies. Appreciate it. Yeah, good luck.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So get on Twitter. I think it's at Governor Brown. I'll look at it right now, but I'll tweet it out.
The website for Jerry Brown is gov.ca.gov, I think.
Perfect.
So it's literally gov.ca.
We'll tweet it out too from ours.